So let's start. I have a couple of slides. I basically have really a lot of slides. We don't have to go through all of them because as I discussed it with Dennis, I put everything together, and the main focus is AD and VAGRANT, but I also have some slides about how do I set up this in combination with my Docker image with Terraform and in the cloud. So I can give you a short overview. As you see on my first page is that I'm a DBA guy. I'm an Oracle DBA. So I mainly work on Oracle databases since over 20 years. I try to avoid Windows if I can. I don't have even a Windows PC or laptop. So I prefer Linux as well. But I came to the point when I do my security engineering and particular database security, I always have the need that I somehow have to integrate this with Active Directory, in particular for Kerberos authentication, send privileged user within an LDAP, within Active Directory. So that's where I have the problem and the need to set it up. Yeah. As I said, I work for TRIVADIS since 12 years. We used to be a small company based in Switzerland, Germany, and Austria with around 700 employees. But 4 weeks ago, we have been acquired by Accenture. So we are now a bit larger, but I'm still, for me, it's still everything as it was before with the 700 employees. So I'm not yet onboarded to Accenture. Yeah, so that's where we are based. I'm coming from Bern, and I grew up in Bern, but I'm currently living close to Zurich. But I do my projects mostly in Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. Yeah, I have an agenda. We definitely will not go through all the slides and do all the topics. I have a rather long introduction, which we may speed up a little bit to come to the scripts, the AD scripts and VAGRANT setup. And I will, in the second part, as Dennis said, I will show you how to speed it up and how to run it and use it. We will see it, and I will explain it also later on. Sometimes the setup of Active Directory automatically with PowerShell script can be quite challenging. It does not, or it did not work always. So that's why I prepare 2 environments. We can have a look into it, and we also can set up a new one if possible. Yeah, I mean my main reason why I start with this, my motivation was that I had to do some tests and to do, in particular, onboard new employees in my team to bring them up to the Oracle database security engineering, to bring them up to speed that I can handle this part. This was one stuff. The other stuff is self-study. These are all reasons why I quite often use lab and trainings environment. I also give trainings for TRIVADIS. The main focus on database security and backup recovery for Oracle databases. There I always need some kind of environment, test lab and environment. As well, there is a POC and really the most important part is that I use quite often, or I do quite often, tests of new Oracle features. I used to be in the beta program from time to time. And one of the reasons why I started to set up an Active Directory was the Oracle feature which has been introduced with Oracle 19c, a direct integration of Active Directory. And I was at an event, an Oracle event, and a German Oracle technical guy, pre-sale guy, he said, yeah, there's a new feature and I would like to test it, but I cannot test it because I don't have an Active Directory. And then I said, yeah, I would like to test it. I want to have an Active Directory. And that's why I somehow then start, okay, challenge accepted. I'm going to set it up and start to using it. Yeah, a few information about test systems. I mean, you guys are doing tests and the engineering quite a lot, so you don't have to go into detail. But if I usually do tests at the customer, that I always have the problem that I don't have an environment, it's not up to date, etc., etc. That's why I come to the point and say, yeah, if I want to do some tests, in particular with Active Directory, I don't want to set it up. I don't want to set up Windows. I don't want to install patches and do this stuff of things. So I would like to start something, wait a little bit, and then having something which I can play with. Yeah. Okay, then we're gonna look how I do the setup with VMs, but I start also to set it up on in the cloud, in particular in the Oracle cloud for engineering. I did also set it up together with Docker. I mean, I did not set up Windows in a Docker container, but I usually set up Windows in a VM and then do the database or run the database in a Docker container, just to have a smaller footprint on my engineering laptop. Okay. Here, before we come to the point where I start to discuss about my AD part, is a bit the overall picture why I start to work with this engineering part, my background. I mean, this picture shows every Oracle security feature which is available, from encryption to firewalls to directory integration, and basically the red box below here, the directory server, means the Oracle directory server, and the Active Directory server. This was my main reason why I start to come into this topic. My intention was that I really have the same problem as Dennis explained. I mean, the first time I set up an Active Directory, I had, I think, two or 3 days until I went through a documentation, and until, because I get disturbed and they had to start again, start over. Then I had an Active Directory running, and after a couple of weeks, my VM wasn't running anymore. I don't know, I had to remove it, hadn't enough space, etc. And then I had to start over again. That was the time that I said, no, that cannot be the case. It's annoying to set it up, to set this up all the time. Yeah, this is the why, and also what I did, what I engineered, and that's also my focus on Active Directory. My Active Directory engineering is that I usually do this for Kerberos authentication and for directory integration of the Oracle database. So with my Active Directory setup, this is not something called for every use case. I have a focus on these 2-3 use cases, and that's why I set it up this way. Maybe the case that we have different setup, different use cases where there needs more configuration done and more in deep setup implemented. In particular, if you would like to have multiple Active Directory server with a forest and domains organization and this stuff, I haven't set it up. Then a few notes about why and where to put the lab. I mean, cloud is really the state of the art today. As an Oracle guy, or a guy who's working quite a lot with Oracle stuff, I usually use Oracle Cloud, the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. But I also travel a lot. I go to the customer in Germany, Austria, etc. I use this travel time, in particular when I travel by train, to do engineering. And I mean, I don't know if you guys ever travel with an intercity train from Zurich to Stuttgart, but there's no way that you can work within a cloud. That's why another reason why a local VAGRANT setup is my favorite solution for this kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's my bucket list. I want to have an Active Directory server. I want to have a database server. I want to have some fancy user schemas which I can use with. I mean, I don't just need an Active Directory. I also need some users, some groups, something which I can work with. So this is going to put all on my bucket list. And we're going to look now into what we have. I'll first show you where you'll find my scripts and what's my approach. I have a set of scripts. They are public, available in GitHub. They can be used for different kind of implementation. I'm going to show you at least two ways how I use them. They can be used manually and even semi to full automatic setups. The full automatic, it entirely depends on what platform you want to use it. Main focus of today is the script for VAGRANT, but I provide you a sneak preview on how to use it and set it up for Terraform, for instance, as well. And this is the overview of my repository, which I have. I mean, I think the repository which has been found by Dennis was the first one, the VAGRANT configuration for TRIVADIS labs. This is my main GitHub repository which I use to set up these VAGRANT VMs. We're going to have a closer look into the repository and the scripts later on. When I get first contacted by Dennis, I then somehow thought, the AD scripts has to be, they require a bit of cleanup. That's why I created another GitHub repository just for the Active Directory setup script to make it a bit more easy to use it for other environments and just to have access to the script itself without having the whole background stuff around it. Besides this, I have a couple of other scripts. I have my ORADB INIT scripts. These are bash shell scripts, which are purely used to set up the Oracle databases, to set up, to install the Oracle binaries, to set up an Oracle database, which can then be used together with the different use case, which I can show you later on. I also have a bunch of Docker script and the Docker build script, as well as a couple of Terraform modules, which can be used just for this engineering purpose. I know there are plenty of setup script and Docker build script for Oracle stuff around. I decided to use my own because I have a main focus on have the possibilities to patch the database. If you use the official scripts from Oracle, they are just updated once in a while, and if you want to install also the latest security patch, then you have to build them, modify them your own. Just an overview of the GitHub. I mean, just as a reference, just keep this as a reference in the slides, which the slides itself will be provided to everybody. I'm going to send them to Dennis, and Dennis can then also distribute them accordingly, make them available for download. The AD-LAB, which we're going to look into closer just in a minute. And then the ORA-INIT. The ORA-INIT is really purely the bin script for setting up and installing the binaries, the response files here in RSP to set up a database. And I'm going to use exactly the same script for creating my Docker image, my VAGRANT database boxes, as well as my cloud resources. So these are always the same scripts which you're going to use. Yeah, put the use case I put together in a few Oracle with a few use case script. So, now, one question is, which I ask me from time to time as well, is why I stay on plain bash and PowerShell script. When I initially start, I didn't have an idea that I'm going to use them so wide and so broad. So that's why, to be honest, I didn't have a plan how I want to use them or how complex they could become. That's why I start with them. They were historically grown. I think I started 3 years ago, something like 3 to 4 years ago, something like this. And they're completely based on my own needs and requirements. Initially, I had not really a lot of experience with Ansible, Puppet, etc. So that's also a reason why I never looked into these tools when I initially set up. Sometimes now it's maybe a problem, a negative point, but yeah, it's like this, and I cannot change them now. If I would start again now, probably I would use some kind of tool to set up my environment, which make the whole thing easier. Yeah. I mean, the scripts are public available. You can access them. You can comment them. I try to respond as fast as possible, and it's really highly welcome if you use them, if you provide feedback, and if you have input and ideas, because then I can make them better and new without any problem. And that's the cool thing. If I create them just for my own and I'm the only one which is using them, they will never be as good as when a couple of other guys are using them. Okay, before we look into the script, I have one couple of slides about the TRIVADIS lab company. That's why I said I want to test a few things, and one centric point of my AD setup script is that I also set up something. So I gonna install certain data, because just a plain Active Directory is nice and it's great to have one, but sometimes it's really helpful to have something like a company, an organization which can be used. So user groups. That's why I invented the TRIVADIS lab company, which is part of the scripts. This allows me to engineer certain things like user role concept, and it makes it easier because these are completely test user. I don't have to care about any dump of production, because I cannot dump a production Active Directory and load it into a lab environment. It's usually not really optimal. Yeah, that's why I use this TRIVADIS lab as a training test environment. The company has different department groups. You will see the names are quite common. So basically are mostly known to everybody of you guys. Beside this, it's then more on the database side. I have a matching Oracle database schema which does match my organization, in particular to engineer the Oracle private database, to engineer Oracle enterprise security, so to really have the complete picture, so that when I set up a row level security on an Oracle database, which is integrated into Active Directory, that if someone is logging into this database, that he then only has this privilege which has been granted through an Active Directory role group. That's only possible if I have something in AD. Yeah, you can see it. The company has a couple of departments, a senior manager, and in each department we have a manager and a few employees, mainly from James Bond, a couple of Douglas Adams stuff, and yeah. Then I have a couple of departments. Each department has a name and a distinguished name, and you're going to see it within the scripts. My default setup is using trivadislab.com as an address, but my script can be customized. And I just double checked this afternoon. You can select any other domain name as you want to use. You don't have to use trivadislabs.com. You can take whatever you want. This is just how the setup does look like for the departments. And then I have a couple of groups just to have a starting point, also with Trivadis based. Okay, let's look into the Active Directory scripts. I just saw in the chat that you were talking about the Windows license and ISO image, and so I'm gonna show you later on how I'm gonna use my VAGRANT setup. So I basically don't have to care about which Windows version, because I just take one from the VAGRANT cloud. But I show you this later on. So my AD-LAB-POWERSHELL script, they, as I said, a set of PowerShell scripts. They do set up the AD, and they also do set up a couple of tools. The tools are basically the ones which I use for my Oracle engineering stuff, but nevertheless, this can be enhanced as needed. The scripts they have a secret in the file name, so the idea is that if you run them manually, that this is somehow the way how you have to run them. Basically, not every step is necessary. Means I have more scripts than which are then they are necessary to use. But we see this when we do a test. Yeah. There is one script which starts with 2 zeros. That's the init environment script. So I can use this PowerShell script. I was quite surprised that I can also source a script in PowerShell. Didn't know this. Similar like I do this in Bash quite often. So I have this init script which can be used to add customization, like a different domain name, like any other stuff, different IP addresses, etc., etc. This script is sourced in all of the scripts. The AD scripts, they are available in GitHub, and I start to use them also in my VAGRANT setup, so that I don't maintain anymore this AD setup script in my VAGRANT configuration. I changed my VAGRANT setup that the VAGRANT is downloading the latest version of these scripts via GitHub. These are the 4 lines. So we define the stage folder where you're going to stage the scripts, and then define the GitHub URL, and then run the command to download them and unpack. Later on, you have to unpack it, and then you can start using them. So that's how I'm going to use them in all my environments where I do the setup. So in VAGRANT, I use exactly this step to get the scripts. Then afterwards, I'm going to execute them to set up Active Directory. And for instance, for my cloud-based setup with Terraform, I just use these steps to get the latest scripts. I don't set it up with Terraform completely, but that's another topic which I can explain later on. There are 2 ways of customization of these scripts. I have a config directory with a file called default configuration. And this file will be read when the init environment PS file is sourced. So there's one possibility that default configuration settings can be updated directly in this script, or that you modify the 00 init environment PowerShell script. Besides this, there is some other specialty. By default, if not specified, I can generate the passwords. So the passwords are usually created with a random function, but you can also predefine a password in the file default password Windows text. That's the file is located at the same place as the default configuration text. So if you want to have a specific file, or a specific password, you can add it in there. Then just going through the scripts here now, I then have split them up in different activities. I have one to set up the AD role, which is really installing the AD role on the directory, on the server. And after this has been done, and that's the important part, is the system has to reboot, because we are setting up Windows, and the Windows have to be rebooted quite a couple of times. As soon as the server role, the Active Directory server role is installed, and the system has been rebooted, we then can run the config AD script to configure the Active Directory. Basically means to install and load the TRIVADIS lab company. Then another script is to configure the DNS, to configure the directory server, and to add, not the directory server, sorry, the domain name server. Then the next script is to set up and configure the certification authority. I need this when I do engineering with Kerberos, so and SSL, etc. I need a certificate authority to have assigned certificates, which you can then use to set up the Active Directory integration of an Oracle database. I will come to this point a bit later as well, but just as an information. One of the trickiest part when setting up these scripts and when using these scripts, and I have this from time to time, again, is that sometimes it's really hard to know why a script is not yet running. I'm not a Windows guy. I don't know all the details about the different services which have to be set up to be able to install certain other services, etc. But it happened to me when I configure the AD and install the AD, that when I do it manually, I could immediately configure the certificate authority. But when I run it with VAGRANT setup and execute the script, I suddenly had the problem that the script does not work because internally the service for AD is not yet available after the reboot, and that's why the certificate authority could not be set up. So a couple of scripts, they have some sleep and delays in. I discussed this with a Windows guy. We have in TRIVADIS, we have 2-3 Windows administrators which also are familiar with setting up Active Directory. And yeah, their comment was like, yeah, you have to wait until certain service is working. And I mean, I just did a simple solution to say, yeah, I run a script a bit later on, or I run a sleep delay in to wait, and then it's working. Then have a sum up script which provides some information that has been set up. Then the scripts starting with the 2, so 22 and later on, these are the scripts to configure other stuff. They are not basically required to set up Active Directory, but they are quite handy when it comes to set up certain tools and utilities. Chocolati, for instance, that's a package manager for Windows. When you install this, you can then easily install stuff like Google, Chrome browser, Visual Studio Code, etc. can then easily be installed via packet manager. That's why I install it, to be then able to configure certain other stuff. In particular, 28 config misc. This is a script where I also set up a few network configuration and also install a couple of tools. The CMU config tool, that's a tool script which I use to configure my Oracle Century Managed User. This is not yet productive, so it doesn't do anything currently. But what's working is the Insta client installation. The template is a template PowerShell script for my other script. Then last but not least, it's the script 40, reach the AD user. You can run this script to reset all the passwords for all the domain users so that you have them all set to a default user so that you can easily use any of this user defined within the AD. So this is the AD script, the lab script configuration, standalone and can be used as it is. A few notes from my side. As I said, I'm not a Windows guy. So I'm definitely not a Windows specialist. I mean, these scripts were my first PowerShell script. I mean, when we start the meetup and discussion, I hear it from one or the other guy that you do not use Windows and do not set up Windows. So I really try to avoid it, and I don't set up Windows Server. Definitely not productive, just for labs, and then also with a limited extent. And still, after a couple of years in IT, Windows is nice and it's okay and it's much better than before, but it's still not my best friend, and not because it's not nice. It's just because I'm coming from Linux. I'm coming from Oracle databases on Linux, and I used to work on Solaris and AX, but I sometimes not really. You haven't yet become best friends. Yeah, and that's what I mentioned here. That certain configuration steps can really bring you, can drive you nuts when that the CR authority does not work, when the service is not yet done, but when you log in and run it manually, then it works. And so that's really sometimes a bit difficult. And I try to make it as good and as possible and as automatic as it is working. And this situation is also the reason why I do not have yet a setup script for setting up an Active Directory server together with Terraform in a cloud environment. That's my basic problem, because the bootstrap there and the cloud init and cloud init setup is not yet working, cannot yet handle a couple of reboots until the setup is done. Yeah. And some other, I mean, the last sentence here is my AD setup. That's just configuration which does meet my requirements. So I can work with my use cases I define, but I cannot provide any guarantee that I meet common best practice. I double check this with the Windows admin from our company a couple of years ago, but still, I mean, if you show this AD setup to a Windows hardcore Active Directory administrator, you probably have some idea for improvement. So that's regarding the scripts itself. So now let's have a closer look to VAGRANT and how I'm going to use them in a special case with VAGRANT. I saw in the chat you were discussing about the Windows version. I show how I'm going to do this when I use VAGRANT. I was just a lazy DBA, and I said if I have to set up Linux, an Oracle database on Linux, I just use the Oracle Enterprise Linux VAGRANT image, which is provided by Oracle. So I don't have to care. So it's I call it carefree package for an Oracle DBA. I have a Linux which is working. It's probably not the best and the optimal configured Linux, but it's simple, straightforward, and it can be used quite fast. There are other possibilities, other VAGRANT image. You can create your own VAGRANT image as well. But I just said, no, for my use case, I just take the plane which is available, and on top of it, I can customize the Linux in a way that it does work for my dedicated use case. As I said, my goal was not to optimize or to have an optimized Linux setup and configuration. For Windows, it is quite similar. Initially, I was looking for the Windows, and I was thinking about setting up my own Windows image, but I then get into VAGRANT and check how this is possible and what is around. And I found the image from Stefan Oehrli. Stefan Oehrli is a Microsoft MVP guy. He is maintaining a bunch of Windows VAGRANT image for VirtualBox and for VMware, from Windows 11 to Windows 2019, Windows Server 2016. And it's really nice and straightforward to use them. And in combination with VAGRANT, it's quite simple because we can just specify them as a source, and VAGRANT itself will then download the image from the VAGRANT cloud and use this image to set it up. This image is based on this Microsoft preview or development license. I don't know the exact name, but that's the one which is valid for 180 days. And as far as I know, the license can be renewed 1 or 2 times. I've never done this. I throw away the image before and create a new one usually, because it's VAGRANT and takes me half an hour to create a new VM for testing, and it's quite okay. So this is the base image which I use. Then again, my lab setup and what I use is my TRIVADIS lab is focused on VirtualBox. It is also possible, in particular, the Windows VM is also available, as far as I know, for VMware. I just use VirtualBox because my PC or my laptop is a Mac. I have Mac OS, and a couple of years ago I stopped paying for the VMware license and decided to go to VirtualBox or back to VirtualBox. Just for simple lab environment is quite okay. Again, here my scripts, trivadislab.com on GitHub. beside this, you require to have a VAGRANT and also VirtualBox installed. I usually just install them on macOS with Brew, so with the packet manager, so I don't have to care about latest version, etc. Just can install them via Brew, and then it's really simple and straightforward. My setup does then provide, or this VAGRANT script provide a couple of things. The initial one, which we will look closer into, is the Windows environment. I have one for Windows 2019 and 2016. I also have a setup for Oracle Unified Directory Server, and I have a couple of setups for Oracle Database Server from 21C, the latest innovation release, back to Oracle 11. My overall setup, which I use, does include 3 VMs at the right side. I have the Active Directory server on this picture with Windows 2016. I have the directory server, the Oracle directory server in the middle, and on the left side I have a database server, in this case a database server, database 19C with 2 Oracle databases. So that's my setup, which I usually use to work with my Oracle security stuff. So if I just have to engineer something with Oracle, which doesn't need a directory server or Active Directory server, I just start the database server, and if I want to do the whole stuff, I'm going to start 2 or 3 of them, so all of them. My lab setup has a structure which allows me to extend and use it in a simple way. Initially, it's again grown up in the past. I set up a few scripts, and then I start to set up certain scripts for Oracle 12.2, and then one for 18, Oracle 18, then 19, and etc. And that's why I have scripts for each database version, individual scripts. So I have, for each environment, I have a config and a script folder for a specific script. On the other side, I have a folder called common scripts and common config. And the idea is that stuff which is not specific to a version that is stored in there. Initially, when I started this TRIVADIS lab, I haven't used other Git repository. I mean, I mentioned the AD-LAB, which is a different Git repository and which is downloaded to a VAGRANT setup. And this could also be something for the Linux setup, but I haven't done this initially, so that's why I have this different folder and common location. So the common config, and I look into this when we set up an environment. I have a documentation folder which is relatively slim. My main focus is writing on scripts, and currently documentation is mainly just for myself, so that's why I haven't that much documentation, which can change over time. Then I have a few lab demos or a few demo scripts which are available to set up AOS, CMU, PDB isolation. These are specific scripts which can be used then in the different environment. As you see on the right side, this common folder and this lab folder is defined within the VAGRANT configuration file and is then available within the VM. So that's why if I set up a database 12.2 here, I have then access to the common folder, to the lab folder to use certain scripts. So then, as I said, I have different, for each version release, I have different scripts. Databases here, just 12.2, 18, and 19. Then I have a config for Oracle Unified Directory. Something which I haven't yet mentioned is if you want to set up an Oracle software, means the database server and the Unified Directory server, you always need Oracle binaries. Oracle binaries cannot be downloaded from public. You always have to log into an Oracle web page, Oracle support page to download it. And that's why I defined the method that I have this software folder, and you have to download the corresponding software manually, put it into the software folder, and Vagrant is then accessing the software folder to install the binaries. Yeah, that's just a workaround, because I cannot download Oracle binaries directly from the script. So basically, it would be able, but then I have to specify the password for the Oracle account into the scripts. And adding my Oracle account to GitHub script is not really a good idea. And the last here, the green one, is then the Windows specific setup. In this case, just the Windows 2016. We're going to look into the Windows 2019. Here are the configuration files. I'm gonna change the screen immediately in a couple of seconds and show you the file as an example. I mean, I have this central VAGRANT file which I use for different purpose. So I just have one point where I can add a couple of things, and this file is then loaded into different VAGRANT files. So I use this YAML file to define certain common configuration. And I can access then the information from this VAGRANT file within the VAGRANT config with this syntax. Besides this, I also source this VAGRANT file with my 00 init environment script. So everything which I define within this YAML file is then available as an environment variable within the Linux setup, as well during the VAGRANT setup. So I just check. Stop sharing, and I'm going to share the so you see here my Visual Studio Code in a second. So here I have my I have here my TRIVADIS lab folder, and I have this common folder with a common configuration file. And I mentioned this VAGRANT YAML file, and we see here now that I have a couple of common settings which are defined, like the domain name, DNS server. Then I have a specific per environment. I defined a few settings, like the Windows 2016 or the Windows 2019 configuration. I did also set up this afternoon a test for today, where I did use a Windows 2019 ISC environment. I just set the domain name to example lab hostname, different hostname. Yeah, and then beside this, I have then section for Oracle. So I really have everything here central in this VAGRANT YAML file. When I close this now, the common section, and I jump into my Windows 2019 specific folder, I see here my VAGRANT configuration file, which is initially loading this configuration, this YAML file, and then I can assign stuff which is loaded with this configuration. I can assign this stuff to here to these variables. So I have the common stuff, domain name, password, DNS, etc. Then I have box specific stuff, and these are then the things which I'm going to use during my setup. Then here I start my VAGRANT section. I'm going to map this common folder and the VAGRANT lab folder, as I mentioned before. Set up the environment, etc. Then here I start my initialization script. And you see I start with this INIT 01 lab setup script. As an argument, I provide the domain name, IP, DNS, etc., which has been defined here. So everything which is in the YAML file is added to this variable, and the variable is passed on to this setup script. After this setup script, I run the next one, and you're gonna have a look into this script as well. Then I have 3 scripts to finally set up the Windows VM. And the special part is that I have to do reboots between some of the scripts. This is done with a VM provision with the reload script, and the reload is a VAGRANT plugin which is causing a reboot of the VM during provisioning. And these scripts now, as you can see them here, these are local scripts defined in my VAGRANT environment. So the init script, and then part 1, 2, 3. The init script itself is, it looks quite complex, but at the end it's not really complex. I accept a few parameters. So the parameters which I passed in here before, sorry, the one here, are passed over to the script, and I define a few default variables. So if nothing has been specified again, it will be taken TRIVADIS lab. Then I always print out the settings and configuration. Here I'm gonna grab my Git, my AD-LAB script from GitHub. Then I mentioned something earlier, the default configuration file. What I do here is I update this default configuration file, and I add the stuff which has been passed to the script into this file. It's a bit, yeah, how should the sledgehammer method, or in German we say Holzhammer method. It's really a workaround that I can pass over certain setting and configuration setting to the AD setup script. I mentioned this here, the config. So this config script which I have in the AD-LAB, I have all this setup script which I mentioned before, and in this default configuration, I have these entries again, my default values in. And during the VAGRANT setup, I do nothing else. Close this. I do nothing else than everything which is passed in via VAGRANT is being replaced in this default config. So to make sure that when I go down and run my, so this is really just initialization. When I go to the first part and I start the real setup script, it starts the 01 install AD role, and this script then takes the stuff which has been defined and configured in this default configuration file. And then in the first part, I also set up the Chocolati. As you see, I had to move this to this place because Chocolati required the reboot, so that's why I decided to move this setup to the first part. Then the second part, I'm going to add the lab configuration. I'm going to add service principal, DNS configuration, and finalize this part with the update. And I have the third part, which is then installing a couple of tools. And at the end, I configured the certificate authority. And I really had a problem because I initially did this right after setting up the AD itself, and it didn't work. And that's why I played around, and then I move it to a later stage so that it is only installed at really the final stage when every service is up again. Yeah, this is how the VAGRANT part is executed. And yeah, I mean, the script itself, I don't really go through all them. You can have a look. It's nothing complex. These are the setup script itself, which I use to set up the AD. I put them together based on a couple of documentation on how to set up an AD, and that's how I do use them. usually we don't have to modify anything here. Yeah, sledgehammer to crack a nut. Yeah, the sledgehammer I think is, yeah. So switching back, I'm gonna finish this chapter. The scripts, just as a reference, don't have to go into detail again. I did show this. I think, yeah, I just showed it now in the script and the files, and we don't have to go into the detail. Just the build process. I have 3 slides about this. This one is for the DB. Another one is for the VM. Sorry, the Unified Directory, and the third one is for the Windows Server. I immediately jump to the Windows Server because this is the main focus. Is yeah, that we have really set up the configuration, the disks. Then we go through the init, configure the part 1, 2, 3. And then depending on the environment, the speed, performance, etc., it takes up to 10 minutes up to 30 minutes. So I think we're gonna do a try and check how long it takes after. Yeah, the requirements. For VAGRANT, we just need VAGRANT, the VAGRANT command line utility, and the plugin. And the VM proxies will be downloaded during the setup. The Windows image is about 4 GB. So if this will be stored locally in a cache, and if you have to download it the first time, it takes a moment until the 4 gigs are downloaded. Then for the Oracle software, it's just a way you're gonna store them locally and upload them during the provision. This is what we're gonna do later on. Yeah, that's just a summary. How to build and reproduce the environment. Yeah, and my really most important part, the stuff which I really like most is from time to time I screw up my Windows environment because I do engineering, and then somehow it doesn't work anymore. I just remove it, rebuild it, and then it's really straightforward and simple. So that's what I like most. Yeah, I would say then we're gonna make a short break for about 10 minutes or 5 minutes. What